I had a whole sermon written out, but it's almost gone out the window completely now. Who am I, and how did I get here? So last year, the Adventist Church has a process with much weeping and gnashing of teeth and crying that we go through something called the nominating committee. And several members in the church are chosen to be on this committee to ask other people to lead in the church. And this is when people's phones suddenly go unanswered many times. Or there's much trepidation when they do answer the phone. How can I help you? And this committee meets together, they pray together, and it's supposed to be led by the Holy Spirit to choose the best possible people for the time period. Sometimes that works. Sometimes, human nature, they've been in the position before, we'll leave them there, it's fine. Is that necessarily the best choice? It's the easy choice, but is it the best choice? Now, if you've been in the church long enough, you know you're going to get a call for a certain position. And I knew my time had come. Rick had served as a head elder for, was it 4 or 8 years? It's been a while. And Rick decided it was time to step aside. And I knew that was happening, and I was praying it would not happen. And the pastor's phone number, because I was not on the nominating committee this time. And he's like, Scott, would you consider being head elder? And everything in my being's like, no. I'm like, yes, let me pray on it first. And so I took about 2 weeks to pray and think about it because I know who I am. Now, for those of you who don't know, I spent 13 years in the United States Army National Guard with 2 tours to Iraq. The first time I was in what we call a battalion, and I was the chemical NBC NCO, so I was responsible for, with the lieutenant, to help train all of our soldiers in our battalion, which is, I don't remember anymore, a couple hundred people, about 400. And I had junior leaders underneath there that would help train soldiers to protect themselves from chemical agents. So once the war kicked off, we got into Iraq. The first 30 days, basically, we took out all of Saddam Hussein's Scud launchers, chemical threat, non-existent. I became a glorified babysitter for the rest of the tour in battalion talk. The second time, I had moved positions and ended up in the infantry, where I had become a platoon sergeant, where I was responsible as lieutenant for 45 guys. And we would run night missions in Iraq, and all at night, moving cargo from base to base to base to base, with the threat of IEDs, snipers, roadside bombs, all of that. So I have developed a different sense of leadership than a lot of other people have. Ask my wife. She was not in the military. But when I sit in the passenger seat of our car, and she is my driver, I revert back to a certain mode where I'm scanning for roadside bombs and telling my driver where they need to go and how fast they need to do it. My wife does not appreciate my advice. This morning, perfect example, I was preparing my sermon notes. I said, "You're going too fast, dear. This is a 50 lane. I am following traffic. I am just fine. There's a state trooper right there. They're turning around to follow us. Slow down. I make my own money, and I will pay for it if I get it. So my advice sometimes go unheeded. And one of the things that has been hard for me to adjust to from my wife and other people is when I task down, because I own a business now also. So when I say something, I expect it to be carried out. Well, my wife doesn't work that way. So she asks me a question, and I said, I just gave you my answer. Because in my mindset, once I've made the decision, right or wrong, we're committed to that course of action. Because second guessing yourself gets you killed. Does that happen at church? Well, it can. Sometimes there's landmines out here. So there are many examples of God calling different people in the Bible. And one of the why I brought up the text with Adam and Eve, the first thing Adam does is place blame on his wife. And then in turn, if you read just a little farther, she places blame on the snake instead of taking responsibility. So when I accepted the position of head elder, it was not without thinking about who I am as a person. And when I told the pastor, I will not be a figurehead elder. No disrespect to anybody else who's serving this position. This is what I was telling the pastor for myself. If I see something wrong, I am going to attempt to fix it. He said, okay. I said, you might get some arrows thrown at you. It's like I can. Okay. So I talked about communion a little bit and why we're going to have, or about practice. And I want to go back, and Stoney's going to look at me because I'm going to beat a dead horse, the proverbial beating a dead horse a little bit. But I want to share some of my decision thought process behind that. So last Sunday was our church business meeting. And someone asked, why are we having practice? And it was a good question. I didn't get a chance to answer it then. The pastor kind of carried the meeting. And I sat and listened. So I have to go from that business meeting back to the previous communion. But why am I talking about this? That communion was the first time as a leader I led out. The pastor had got called away. The head deacon was gone. I was the guy holding the stick in charge. And then I had gotten here. The head deacon had appointed someone to be here. Something happened and they couldn't be here right when they wanted to be. And it was as simple as their father-in-law beat them into the shower. And they only had one shower. And so he had to wait on his father-in-law to get out of the shower so he could get here. So the deacon that was in charge that day wasn't here yet, and things needed to get done. So someone stepped up into that role and took over. Then, I had come in by that time, and I was trying to put together another fire that had happened. So as I knew the pastor was going to be on, so I was responsible for the sermon up here and also running communion. Well, previous to that, I said, Rick's going to be my man because he's done this before and he'll walk me through it baby steps. What I did not know was there was another elder that needed training to be here. And he had called me about being up here, and I said, no, I got Rick, I'm good. Well, the pastor never conveyed to me that Will needed training. So that night before, and then Will happened to come to church that day. I said, Will, I'm sorry. You're my man. I didn't understand the whole situation, so you're going up with me. So I can handle the sermon part, so we did that, and then I pulled Rick and Will back. I said, walk us through the steps of what needs to happen. So Rick did that. He coached us from the back. There was a lot of things going on that day. Also, our lead audio booth person went with the head deacon, because they're family, and we're gone. Well, in miscommunications, the audio booth was not properly manned to get things going. Michael stepped up in the morning and got Sabbath school things running. By that time, by noon, Dan had come and was able to get the rest of things working. So there was a lot of pressure on me that day. And then, how do you say this politely? People came and talked to me about what was going wrong. And so I took it. And I thought about it. It took a couple days. I said, I need to address that. But I also needed to address a few other things. So silently, I pulled the sound booth people and got in a meeting. I said, hey, you guys did a great job. We need to work on some things. Communication. SOPs. SOPs is standard operating procedures. So if someone is gone, someone with not quite enough knowledge can look at those instructions and get things going. That was the first thing I addressed. The other thing that I saw and what people told me about was some of the things that happened during the service. If you study your Bible, God is a God of order. And if you study the sanctuary service, everything was meticulously done. Now, I could have taken the person's response and said, oh, they're just being a squeaky wheel. I don't have to deal with that. But that's not right. This is God's house. And I want to do the best that I can with the abilities that I have to make it better. And so that is what started the whole process. And I talked to the pastor about everything that I saw happen. Nothing was terribly wrong. Nobody died. And the service for everything that happened, I thought, went beautifully. And I was so sad that our YouTube wasn't set up that other people could see it. I really was, because so many people did a lot of hard work that day that should be recognized. But as a leader, and I have that military background where I want to do it like this, and it's my word is law, and we're going to move forward. As I stated earlier, this is an all-volunteer organization, and I can't treat you that way. All I can do is humbly step up here and ask, we can do better. So this coming Friday, like I stated before, at 6 o'clock, as many as can come. And I want to actually invite the audio booth people to come Sabbath, if they can, to make sure everything is ready as possible for Sabbath morning. Because I saw the chaos that came in at communion. It wasn't horrible. People got the stuff done. But if we can make communion that much better. And I used to be one of those guys, I still am, let's be honest. I'm not a big fan of communion every quarter. But after I read the history on communion, I understand why now. Because we are reconnecting with God. We are reconnecting with our brethren. We are supposed to be healing old wounds, gathering together and moving forward. We are meant to lift each other up. One of the things, and I don't know where this is going to go yet, with we're working towards building a gymnasium community center, and we're meeting, and it's going to be slow progress. And I don't even know if we'll be able to pull it off, truthfully. But I have faith that it can happen. God can do anything. One of the things I told you I was working on, there's a Bible text that talks about when the people have a lack of vision, they fail. So one of the and I'm not sure how this is all going to work yet, but I've got 5 of these yearly maps. And then I want to put them on the wall so the whole church can see the vision. So it's a 5-year program. In the military, our training cycle was a 5-year program. You can always adjust, but if you have a plan in place, you can see things, you can grow. So from now until 2030, basically, and you can see the progress of this church. Now that we've gone to Cuba once, I believe there'll be a Cuba trip on the next 5 years, because it was that impactful to the people that went. Pastor Lorenzo said, you'll get more out of it than the people that you help. I'm not sure that's true. I got a lot out of it, but I think they got something out of it too. I've been talk about interesting people. So we met a pastor down there. His name's Pastor Alex. That guy should have a PhD. And I've told some stories about him. Does everybody know Brandon Van Fossen from here in the local church? You know the type of questions he asks that try to provoke people into combat, basically. I have never seen another person take Brandon's questions and turn them back to him. Ask Meredith and Walter. They were right there next to him. Brandon would ask this most provoking question he could come up with, and Pastor Alex would turn it around with a biblical explanation and no, bro, you got it wrong. You got to do it this way. And so in Cuba, he does have internet, and he is able to download a VPN, which protects your identity, and he's able to communicate with the outside world. He learned his English by studying Ty Gibson and David Asherak sermon videos. That is how he learned his English and also his theology and how dealing with people, and it is amazing. And so, with some prayers and crossing of fingers and faith, we're hoping to connect this church with him on that 29th for a few minutes, just so you can identify who he is, and he can talk to you for a minute or two. And so, with my leadership style, I'm not used to explaining myself. And so as the head elder, I want to make sure that you know that I'm approachable and I'm not going to yell at you. But I really have a deep passion for this church, and I want to see it grow and move forward. And I think giving the church a vision of a gymnasium, of Cuban trips, of the Gillette, things that are going on. The fair needs to be on that board. Men's ministries, Mark, your musical group, they need to be up on that calendar so the church can see women's ministries. If you have a ministry, it needs to be on that calendar. Why? So other ministries can see that you're working and we can work together for growth. If we see that the fair is on the board and there's something like right now they're talking about, what's his name, Mark, the cook, Mark Anthony. He's possibly coming to do a program free of charge for us. And if we time it right after the fair, which there's a couple slots, that is a huge programming outlet where you can get to a large amount of people, and that's free advertising. And so if we as a people can see this church is growing or trying to do things, people will come. Who wants to come to a dead church? So if they see that there is life, that there is growth, God will bring the people that need to come here. But we have to be ready and willing. So part of that, in reaching inward first and preparing our own hearts for God's service, then we will be much better communicators when it comes to outward service. So looking after communion, looking after church members, there are families on this church that are about ready to leave because they're broken. I don't know how to help them yet. But if we can show Christ to our own people and lift them up, people need a sense of purpose and mission. Because when we wander in our own self-pity, we just internalize and we start thinking of ourselves. And where does that lead us to? Broken. If we can get away from ourselves and learn to help other people. That's Jesus' 90% of his ministry was helping people. Theology came to the 10%. But he healed their needs first. And we have people in this congregation that have needs. So I ask in closing, please be forgiving of me. But as I've learned and started to take a leadership role, I hope it's with Jesus as the lead and that I'm following what he's doing. And we as a church need to get together, because I'm not the only leader here. There are other leaders in this church that have their own programs that need supported. Michael has stepped up into the fair booth role. He's going to be needing money this year because the pastor can't get it from the conference. So that'll have to come from the church this time. So be thinking about that. You're going to hear a ministry about Cuba and what they need. You'll have to pray for yourself and make the discernment of where your funds need to go. I'm not here to tell you how God leads your heart. That is between you and him. There's going to be a lot of opportunities. So I just ask that you pray for this church. You pray for the people in this church. You pick 2 or 3 people and you pray for them every day. Or Rick had been promoting praying for a tithe, a portion of your day for a certain amount of time. And then I had the program of 7 o'clock at night on Friday night. Pray for specific things. So we were praying for Oliver. We were praying for our gymnasium / community center. But there's other, and the Lord will put burdens on your hearts to pray for this church. There are things coming in this world in the next year or two, and we need to be together. I'm going to throw this out here. It seems way off the wall, but it's been in the news cycle the last few months. Mark Finley has done a sermon on it. There's been talk of alien entities speaking to our government. That's in the news. Look them up. You'll find them. It's not aliens. It's demons. There is a cultists from the time period of Ellen White that said 2025 was going to be the year that they would expose themselves. If you read Roger Monroe's books, he doesn't give a timeline, but he says they will be making an appearance, a physical manifestation. Brethren, we are coming upon that time. And if our hearts aren't in the scripture, aren't focused on others, we're going to focus on ourselves and be lost. So as a church, we need to uplift each other, support each other, and help each other be ready for Christ's coming. Make sure I covered it all. So this Friday night, if you can find time in your schedule, I promise we won't stay over an hour. But if you can make time, and even if you're not a deacon or deaconess, I would like everybody that has an interest in this church to come and see the process. And for lack of a better term, I would like to see us create a small handbook for communion and other events in our church. That way we can hand out a small pamphlet or booklet with an SOP. This is how we do it. It brings structure, because this next communion, most of the deacons that are in charge are brand new. They're our young bucks, and they need a little guidance. They need some discipline. No, they just need some guidance. And it's a good time for us. I would like to see what the deaconesses do. I know that they do an excellent job, but I don't know exactly what they do. Does everybody know what happens with the juice and the bread afterwards? Couple? Usually I get the juice and I have to go dump it out because the deaconess goes, hey, this is your job. Okay. And then I usually get the bread because I'm one of the few people that still have a burn barrel. And the bread gets burnt. So these are just little things, but if we can make the process easier for everybody to learn, to grow, and if we learn to work together in these small things, when the bigger challenges come, because we are going to have more challenges in the future, we will have known each other, we will have prayed with each other, and we will be like that unbreakable bond of sticks. You're not alone, you're with a group.